Hello, and welcome to this special interview episode of It's a Fandom Thing. I'm your host, Erin Marlowe, and I am very honored to be sitting down with writer director Paige Campbell to discuss their film, STRIYA. And see, I'm still questioning myself there, but you can definitely correct me. I like keep trying to pronounce it, and I'm like, and I hate when I don't pronounce something right because it feels so disrespectful. So definitely correct me.
You
But
got it.
this is a vampire film, but more importantly, this is a Jewish vampire film from Jewish lore. So before we get into that and before discussing the importance of that, because vampires are my favorite in the monster subgenre of horror, and I've never seen a vampire movie that was told from this perspective. So that was really fascinating to me. So before we get into the importance of that, if you want to just tell us a little bit, Paige, about where this idea comes from, the history and the lore.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I love horror films, but I've actually never written and directed a horror film before. This is my first foray into genre at all, which is very exciting. And really, it just came from the fact that I absolutely love supernatural horror films. I love vampire films. I love possession films, but they are all very Christian oriented in terms of the lore and the understanding of good and evil and how power works, and then ultimately, how good prevails over evil. That a lot of it is, I won't necessarily say dependent upon holding Christian beliefs, but definitely drawing on lore that inevitably at some point really kind of tests my ability to suspend my disbelief because it's making different assumptions about the world than I am as a Jewish person. And so I really, I got into, I think it was a thread on Twitter, maybe back when we were still calling it Twitter, by Rabbi Danya Ruttenberg, talking about different potential interpretations of Jewish law when it came to different kind of mythical creatures. And she had entertained the possibility of a Jewish vampire. How would a Jewish vampire, live when Jews aren't allowed to drink blood? And that got me Googling. And in doing that, I came across our very own vampire legend, which is different from what I guess I would call like the Western or the Christian vampire.
And what is it exactly? And I know you don't want to give away like anything about the movie necessarily, but what is it that makes it so different? Because I've never really thought about that as like the vampire. Because yes, it's true. So many horror films stem from Christianity for sure. And so, what is it that's different about that lore from, say, the vampire lore that we're so used to?
I would say, well, there are obviously many differences, but I would say the two really key ones are that a stria or an estri, all different words for it, is an opt-in situation. So you can't be attacked and become a Jewish vampire. You have to decide to become a Jewish vampire. And our texts do not elaborate on how you do that, which I like to imagine means they really thought you could do it. And the other thing is that all Jewish vampires are female. There are no male Jewish vampires. And generally speaking, although here too the lore varies a little bit depending upon region and tradition, they generally attack men. So it is a real, even though there's nothing in Western vampire lore that says a woman can't become a vampire or that vampires don't attack men, and obviously there's a lot of really wonderful like queer storytelling that involves vampires. It is an inversion of what we would think of as like the sort of Dracula archetype of a man that is attacking and violating women. That the Jewish vampire, the Stria, really reflects, I think, our particular cultural fears around women and power and sexuality. And there's a lot of other really fun stuff, like she's not negatively affected by holy objects because she's a Jewish woman. She's a Jewish person, and so there's no reason that a mezuzah on a door would stop her from entering. There's no reason she couldn't enter a synagogue because those are connections, I guess, we hold that sort of transcend becoming an evil, blood drinking, flying witch. So those are the big ones.
That's so interesting, especially that it's only women. And it leads me to one of my questions when I was watching this is hair seemed so important. Like they kept talking about cutting her hair. to stop her. Um, and a little bit of the background is, so a woman she is a vampire now, and they are going to try and kill her. And the father is pleading for her to survive, to live, because he will basically have nobody left if she dies. And they keep talking about cutting her hair. So I wanted to ask about that. Does that come from the lore, or is it part that, without giving anything away, there's an amazing scene that involves hair towards the end. And was that part of the lore, or was it just because hair is so important, I think, to women in a way?
It is absolutely part of the lore. The STRIYA flies using her hair. And
Ah, okay.
so the way that you are supposed to prevent her from feeding on you or prevent her from flying and sort of accessing her full range of powers is by keeping her hair bound and covered, which is also traditionally part of Jewish female observance once you become married. So there is definitely this relationship between like, women's hair and their beauty and their, not necessarily directly sexual availability, but the association of when you cover your hair versus when you don't. And this is a really interesting, specific cultural manifestation of kind of directly engaging with covering the hair as like a power dynamic. So that comes right from the legend.
Yeah, because that was so interesting to me, because I do find hair is such a especially for women, it's such kind of this I don't know, the way that you are thought of as, if it's different length, different color, it can even have people thinking and attributing different factors to who you are. So cutting it short, to me, it felt almost, and I guess this would be true, cutting off the power that
Oh,
she would have.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, and hair, hair is very important for both Jewish men and Jewish women in different ways. And traditionally covering one's hair in varying ways in the modern era with a scarf or with a wig if you're of a particular genre of Orthodox Jew. And for men, growing it in certain ways and keeping the beard in certain ways, throughout time have all had various manifestations of religiosity and of piety, specifically about deference to God. So it's 100% in line with all of the ways that we think about women's beauty, but also their power and the ways in which we, and by we I guess I really mean men, perceive that power as dangerous.
Yeah, that's very, very, very true. Yeah, it's wrapped up in a lot of things. Um, and I wanted to know a little bit here about the fact that, and please help me with the pronunciation. I'm going to say it because I know we talked about it beforehand, but with Gele, who is the vampire, um, there's talk about, like, a question if after becoming a vampire, if you have a soul. And of course, in a lot of the regular lore, we always think vampires don't have souls anymore. And of course, there's been times when they get their souls back or stuff like that. Um, do you think, and this is not a spoiler at all for the film at all, but do you think that she does personally, or no?
That's a very good question. Um, so an interesting thing that did not make it into this short because it is less than 9 minutes long, and you can't explain every aspect of Jewish law in a 9 minute
Yeah.
short. Although I tried, I did my best. Is that Judaism has we sort of imagine the person as having multiple souls. And so there's sort of like you could think of them as like the most basic soul and the sort of like living soul and the spiritual soul. I do think my particular interpretation of Jewish law is that Gela does have the soul that is being discussed there. But I do think that it is a very modern question also to ask like what it means to lose your soul. Like what does it mean, for example, in the situation that is encapsulated in the short version of STRIYA, to do something to make a decision that can endanger your entire community. Because of course, for your listeners, it's set in the 13th century in Germany, so it's quite a precarious time for Jews. Time and place. And so, what does it mean to choose yourself over your community? What does it mean to make a decision that may benefit you while destroying the people that you love? And I don't know that I necessarily understand that as losing your soul or not, but I'm interested in what the characters in this film, what these men who are put at risk by this girl's decision to gain power that she couldn't otherwise gain power that she couldn't gain by being a good, obedient Jewish woman, what they think of that decision and how they interpret it as losing her soul.
And speaking of that, because a lot of the first part is really you see the men discussing what to do with her before the father even comes along, and then the father comes in. And when they're discussing that, and some people are saying, well, we should just basically almost starve her to death, is the way it comes off. And for some reason that they feel that's less cruel. To me, that seems even more cruel to me, because that's so slow. Um, and it seemed like, and I know because of the time and place that you're setting it, and they are, it's already a hard time for Jewish people. Was there like something where it was almost like, I don't know if this was intentional or not, where it was like, well, we can't deal with another thing that is going to be harder on us. It's hard enough for us already. So we should just get rid of this one little thing that might actually, pose another danger to us.
Yeah, absolutely. And when I write in characters that are not living in sort of the contemporary world as we understand it, I do my best to really, really get into their minds and say, okay, realistically, assuming, obviously it's an unrealistic situation, but if I'm living in the truth of this moment, what does this character want to do? And all of them want to eliminate the threat because they understand that there is a much bigger, more dangerous monster out there. And that is, in this time and place, the Christian world. Because the Christian world has killed groups of Jews and will and is imminently about to do that to their community or a community nearby. And so they would never frame the question as sacrificing this girl, this member of our community to save ourselves, but they are perhaps willing to do it. And I think that's why, specifically, you mentioned that one of the characters on the a beis din being a rabbinical court, sometimes like an ad hoc rabbinical court, which we still have to this day, although not to decide what to do about vampires, generally speaking, for much more mundane things.
Like the generally speaking.
Well, there's a lot of Jews in the world. I don't know. I can't say with absolute certainty there isn't a single beis din that has never had to make a decision in the contemporary, era, but probably not if I had to guess. That, one member of the beis din wants to kill her, wants to smother her to death, in the interest of protecting the village. And he is told, no, we cannot do that because that would be execution. And it is not necessarily about the causing of her death, but about the morality of causing her death. And they are all very clear that deliberately killing her, actively killing her, as what they see as a punishment for her choice, is not something that's acceptable. But they're perfectly willing to eliminate her ability to do harm to others in a way that will definitely lead to her death. It's sort of the trolley problem. We love questions like that in Judaism. And by their estimation, taking into account the fact that they're all potential victims, right? That feels like the most just, right? The most dignified, most merciful way of bringing about her death, because it is beyond question to the logical men of the beis din that she would be allowed to live. And obviously that's what her father is proposing, because he very much wants her to live. But even he is trying to make decisions about her, making promises about her and her body without her input.
Yeah. And it's like, it came off to me as like different levels of control, and not a lot of consent, of course. And I think that's something that, today is a huge, huge thing right now. And so that really came off to me, is that, even though the father is presented, and I want to ask you about the father now, because the father is presented as very kind, but also he still wants to have control of his daughter. So it's kind of like he's clinging to her because it's the last. He was an orphan, he's a widower, he has nobody but his daughter. And so can you talk a little bit more about the father and where the father is coming from in all of this? And do you think it's very, I don't want to say selfish, but in a way like selfish that he just doesn't want to be alone? He can't think about her happiness. It's more his happiness.
Absolutely. I so also for any, I don't know if any of your listeners are big fans of the Yiddish theater, but Shane Baker, who is an absolute legend of the Yiddish theater, is unbelievably talented. Is playing Gele's father, Ansel. Um, he, I wanted to create a character that felt like a Jewish dad that I recognize, like my own father. Um, he would never do anything that he perceived as being in and not in Gela's best interest. But how he perceives her interest is filtered through his own. There is no question that what he needs and wants is also what she needs and wants. There is no question that she could live a life that is separate, at least now that she's made this decision, right? That she could ever live a life that is disentangled and on its own terms. And I think that that is the challenge of the ending, which we won't spoil, but that is the challenge posed by Gela's continued existence, her persistence as this like new creature that she's become. Because it does, he's no one on that base in is considering a future where Gela just is the thing she is. Ansel's coming the closest, but it's with all of these caveats, all of the ways that, he can personally control her. He can personally ensure that the social order would not be upended too much because he sort of lends his authority that he naturally has as a man to her future existence. And obviously we're talking about, being a blood drinking monster. And there's some that like, yeah, having a blood drinking monster running around your community might pose some logistical challenges. I'm not going to pretend otherwise. um, and it does turn out to in the film. But when we sort of think of that figuratively, when I think of my own father and what he wants for me, what he would have me do, what he would have my life look like, how he feels about what it does look like, and how he feels about my ability to resist what he wants it to look like. It makes the question a little bit more ambiguous because I am not currently planning to drink anybody's blood.
Well, that's why vampire lore is so fascinating to me because there's so much to it that, involves so much about consent and having the onus of your own sexuality and what you want to do with your life. And blood is the life force. So it's like using that life force and draining that life force, but also getting power from that life force. And that's why it's so interesting to me because it's true. Even though there are female vampires that we have seen before, it's very rare actually. We did a special episode this year for our Patreon subscribers discussing like our favorite vampires. And we had a couple that were female, but for the most part, it is men. And so I know you already spoke a little bit about that, about how that is the lore, of course, and how it was important also because it always had been Christianity that you had seen. But is there also something more to that with having it be a female vampire, even beyond that, where, I don't know if you're trying to do it. I mean, I know this isn't set in modern day, but like speaking on that, on a woman's power and how society reacts in general when a woman gains any kind of power.
Yeah. I mean, I think that so the sort of central metaphor for me, and this is a reflection of how I feel about myself as a non-binary person, but also as a non-binary person who only relatively recently decided to stop I failed out of being a woman. Was sort of how I came to understand myself as a non-binary person is that I could, and I'm not the first person to talk about gender failure. This is many other people's concept. but to like fail at the expectation of being a woman. And then, as an autistic director, which I am as well, to like fail at the expectation of being neurotypical, to fail at the expectation of being abled, right? What does it mean to stop resisting? Because that is the other feature of the sort of classic Western vampire story, is that in order to be virtuous, in order to win, in order to sort of, I guess, be the 19th century version of the final girl, you have to resist, right? And and obviously, the most recent Nosferatu is asking some really interesting questions about what it means to
Yes.
resist, and what the value of that is.
Mhm.
But that is the like to forever resist, even unto the point of death, right? Even unto the point of sacrifice. And I guess I have just so many times in my life felt myself asking, what does it mean to say, fine, I'm a monster then? Like, what does it mean to say, yeah, you're right. I'm not that. I'm not going to continue in this path of resisting the thing that I am meant to be, or resisting the thing like truly meant to be, right? Resisting doing the thing that is right for me, doing the thing that I want to do. And I really do. I mean, I think of it in terms of like being gender nonconforming, but I think that a lot of women will probably relate to that idea of saying, fuck it. Like, I'm going to do it. I'm just going to do what I want, because not doing what I want, doing what other people want me to do, is going to kill me anyway. So, what is the worst thing that can happen if I lean into my desires, if I choose myself, if I choose my life? And it sounds really, really, rudimentary, but I think there are a lot of women and a lot of queer folks, and probably a lot of other folks too, that have not actually reached the point of saying, fuck it. What is the worst thing that can happen if I choose my own life?
Yeah. Yeah. That's just, yes, I just like basking in that for a moment, because no, it's very, very true and very important. And I think, that what is the worst that could happen question, we don't really often want to ask that because we're so afraid. There's fear is such a driving factor for everything. And when you really sit down and ask that, then you might have to actually be who you truly are and embrace who you truly are. And what might happen is people might, like in here, might turn from you and might want to kill you and, and stifle you and control you. And so that is a really, really interesting question. That's why I just always think horror deserves so much more credit than it does, because horror asks questions that other genres are too afraid to ask. And so I really think with the vampire, you can explore that in so many different ways. Like you mentioned, the latest Nosferatu film, I think, explores a lot of that, a lot of that. Yeah, and demystifies some of the sexiness of the vampire too. But yeah, I agree. So thank you for saying that, because I think a lot of people don't realize that. So, and then turning a little bit here, so it's spoken in Yiddish. So how, I'm sure that was incredibly important to you, especially for the time and place. It would have been really weird if they weren't. So what was involved in that? Like, I know you had someone on set, right, that was doing like the cultural and also dialogue. Is that correct?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it was, I'll just say, everyone's like, well, maybe you could just have them speaking English. And I was like, one of the things that frustrates me the most about period pieces is when we are clearly in an era before modern English exists, with characters that are not speaking English, and they're just for some reason speaking English in a broad English accent.
Yeah.
And I'm like, we're not doing that. We're definitely not doing that. So yes, the Yiddish aspect of it was very important to me, and also because Yiddish, secular Yiddish is having a moment, which I'm really thrilled about, because for many, many years prior to the Holocaust, Yiddish was as much a language of art and culture as it was of religion. And then, of course, the Holocaust killed I think, a significant majority of the world's Yiddish speakers. And so some of that really fell off. And especially as modern Hebrew gained a little bit more popularity as the language to learn for your Jewish studies. Um, Today, well, decreasingly so. People are, like I said, getting into it. But, 10 years ago, really the only people that regularly spoke, communicated in Yiddish, read in Yiddish would be, Hasidic Jews, and anybody who is descended from Holocaust survivors, unless you're like a Yiddish scholar as well. And my dad is a Yiddish speaker, and my grandparents were native Yiddish speakers and Holocaust survivors. And so I really wanted to make a contribution to secular Yiddish art, and especially to Yiddish horror, because there is a tradition of a really quite rich and beautiful tradition of Jewish stories in Yiddish, as well as, Russian and other languages that are common in certainly areas where Ashkenazi Jews were and are, of these really unsettling, self-reflective, moody stories that are not necessarily about fears in the outside world at all, but a reflection of the fear within a community. And so it felt like a really good opportunity to do that. And then it also gave me the chance to work with the inimitable Lily Rosen, who is our translator and cultural consultant. And that was, I mean, truthfully, a very intimidating experience because I'm what my rabbi calls a native listener. So I understand it quite well. I can speak it. I can say sentences in Yiddish, but not to the level of translating my own work. And so to write this script all in English and then to hand it off to somebody who is in her own right a phenomenal artist, a phenomenal writer. I mean, she's so good and she's such a wonderful storyteller. And to sort of trust her with it, to translate it and really do the work of essentially writing it. I won't say rewriting it, but writing it again, writing it in a new way. And she also, she used the dialect a little bit because, of course, it's the 13th century. So they're not speaking modern Yiddish. We wanted it to be intelligible, but there's a lot of German in it too, which was a nice, fun challenge for the actors. Um, and Lily is also a rabbi, so it was good, and a historian. I think she's also a lawyer or something too. She does everything, and an actress. She's really, I mean, she's a woman of many talents, and she grew up Hasidic, and so working with her and her knowledge of the medieval era and Orthodox Judaism, but also how it's changed over time, and how there are a lot of expectations that we might make about traditional Judaism based on what the Hasidim do or based on what other Orthodox Jews do, that actually is quite modern, is like really a lot more, comes from like the 19th century. And the truth is that, at least in 13th century Germany, there are many ways that those Jewish people's lives look a lot more like your average secular Jew today. And so working with her to learn what was different, but what was the same, what is essential, and what is functionally recent tradition that we could decide how we felt about. Honestly, in addition to being one of the most enjoyable parts of the process, was almost also one of the most fruitful because it helps me as a director to understand so much more what my characters are actually experiencing. So I wrote the script. I knew I wanted it to be in Yiddish. I also wrote a lot of Jewish law into it, which hopefully people will find fascinating and not boring. And then I brought it to Lily, whom I actually met at a friend's birthday party, quite coincidentally at the perfect time. She helped me with the halacha, which I'm proud to say I mostly got right. And then also translated. And once she translated, we did some sessions with the actors, almost all of whom are native Yiddish speakers. One or two of whom are highly fluent Yiddish learners, and one of whom learned Yiddish for the role and did a very, very beautiful job. And so we had dialect coaching where she helped them kind of, get everybody on the same page, right? Because saying Yiddish speakers is like saying Spanish speakers, right? Like everybody might be fluent, but that doesn't mean they're all going to sound like they're from the same small town. Yeah. So part of it was getting everybody to, lean into the R's in exactly the same way. And part of it was bringing some of the more German pronunciation that would have been, we assume, common in this time. And part of it was imagination, because the truth is we don't know. We don't know what Yiddish sounded like in the 13th century. But Lily was quite cleverly, pieced together the other information that we do know and made a reasonable guess about it. And so then I obviously, can understand it. I also wrote the script, so that made it a little bit easier. People have asked me how I directed it, and it was actually very normal. It's a very normal process of directing. Yeah, and then we kind of all, everybody got it down, and then we did it, and it was really like it was just absolutely incredible to have such a variety of Jewish experiences and such a variety of Yiddish experiences on set. It was a really beautiful experience.
And so the casting process then, um, how did that go? How did you find like the actors are incredible, all of them are. So how did that casting process go?
Thank you for saying that. I also think they're really wonderful. Non-traditional. I basically started by asking Lily, who do you think would be good for Gele? And she sent me to Dylan Saders Hoffman, who is incredible. And then I met with Dylan, and after talking to her for maybe 20 minutes, I was like, "Great, you've got the part if you want it." Who else do you think we should cast? Tell me every older man you know who is in Yiddish theater and is a good actor. And basically between Dylan and Sophie Kreitzberg, who is featured in the film, her voice is featured. And she was also a script supervisor because she can, read Yiddish and follow along. We put together a list of all of the actors that we thought would be a good fit for one or the other of the roles that we know were fluent in Yiddish. And then we just contacted them, basically met with them, offered them the role, and basically everybody said yes. So that was really very exciting. It went very smoothly. I was thrilled. We have some, I mean, Shane, obviously I mentioned, and also Avi Hoffman. I mean, just really well established, well respected Yiddish theater actors, and they bring all of that good gravitas and energy. And then yeah, everybody else is a wonderful. I'll say up and coming. They're beginning to establish themselves. But Michal Yushinsky, who plays Ota, and Dylan Saders Hoffman, who plays Gela, they are younger. I'm trying to remind myself that not everybody who's younger than I am is a kid, but they are both wonderful young up and coming Yiddish theater performers. And then Ari Brand, who is the one who learned Yiddish for the role. He's phenomenal as well. So it was a nice little good little coming together of a bunch of really wonderful people.
Yeah, and they all did fantastic and really you can tell became the characters and really, really felt their roles. So fantastic job for all of them too.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I want to know, it is a short film. I'm curious, is there a part of you that wants to eventually turn this into a yeah, I had a feeling.
Absolutely. We are already working on it. It's going.
Yeah,
I'm
okay.
I'm manifesting it. It's going to be a feature. I'm developing the feature version right now. Definitely a great opportunity to expand the world a little bit and to get to delve a little more deeply into the lore. There's some of it that's kind of implied in the short, and some places where, because of the length, we used a little. I chose to use a couple of shortcuts to help people understand this is a vampire film. Because it's quite important to understand that right away when you're making a short, especially one that's under 10 minutes. So we'll have a little bit more time to live in the world and understand the differences between STRIYA and the traditional Western vampire, and a little bit more time to get to know the characters as well. So I'm very, very excited about that.
Yeah, I figured I was like, there's no way that they aren't going to want to turn this into a feature length. I would have been very shocked if you had said, no, that's it. I'm done.
Yeah, I was like, yeah, I made a horror film. It was fine. I think I'm done now. Like, I'm gonna make another one. No, I'm so. The more I think about it, and the more I work, the more obsessed I get with the characters.
Yeah. I can tell that there's a lot of love for this story from you and from probably everybody involved. So, because when you're making independent art, I think, not to say that there isn't love in like, million, $100 million pictures. It's just, I think sometimes with the independent ones, there's this other kind of fire because you're not necessarily like making a lot of money. So you're having to give a lot of yourself. And so I think it comes across more sometimes in independent features. So
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Well, or any money if we're talking about a short.
that's true. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
No money at all.
Yeah, yeah, you're
Um,
spending money, but
yes. But no, it is. I mean, it's a labor of love. It absolutely is. And I'm hoping that the future will be both a labor of love and perhaps a labor for money, but we'll see.
yes,
One
yes,
can
because
dream.
yes, you want that. You want that. And I think with the passion you have for it, I think that that could happen definitely. Um, and I want to know then, are you marketing these to short festivals? Have you gotten in any short film festivals that might be coming up too, where people might be able to go or
We've just started submitting. We finished the film. Gosh, I paid my last invoice like January 7th. So we've just started submitting to film festivals. Yeah, the goal is to send, I mean, we're sending into a variety of festivals. The goal is to hopefully play at a number of traditional festivals with good shorts programming, horror and genre festivals, obviously, Jewish festivals. And then we are, of course, sending it to a lot of European festivals because, I think that to shoot the feature, it's going to be very important to shoot it somewhere that we have access to either medieval buildings or medieval reconstruction buildings. I mean, I was very impressed. Shout out to Historic Richmond Town Museum on Staten Island. It played that 16th century house, played medieval very well. But we did shoot in one corner of it and it was very dark. So, so we pulled it off quite successfully, I think. But to have, a feature length, sprawling film
yeah.
about a medieval village, I think that we're going to want to actually have access to a medieval village or equivalent. So we're hoping to screen in Europe, get some attention there, perhaps maybe see what grants for foreign filmmakers or what kind of, local agreements exist, especially in Eastern Europe and the Baltic states and the Balkans. Anywhere that has had a Jewish history, and that is most of Eastern and Southern and Central Europe at some
Yeah.
point, anyway. So that's the
Yeah.
goal. But I will absolutely, as soon as we get into our first festival, you're going to be the first person I tell, other than my producer. I think he would be upset if I didn't tell him first.
Well, yeah, that'd be more important though.
Yes.
But yes, yes,
Him, you, my mom.
yeah, and definitely I'm sure you have probably on the list, but there's the Renegade Film Festival, which they focus a lot on horror, and it used to be the Women in Horror Film Festival. But then they switched completely to do so that they could have more openness to people who aren't usually like recognized in the world of film. So I don't know if you have that one on your list, but
I believe it is.
okay.
Vadim Igul, my producer, has made a absolutely gorgeous, well organized, color coded spreadsheet. I
Yeah.
believe it is on there.
Um, well, lastly, what I want to know, and I always love to, this is my favorite question to ask anybody. And as much as you feel comfortable discussing, but what did you learn about yourself as an artist? And then if you're comfortable as a person through making this short film?
I love that question. I might have listened to a few of your interviews, and so I might be prepared for it. Um, as an artist, I think it's not that this was something brand new, but this process really affirmed for me the value of collaboration and how much I see myself as a collaborative artist. There's different ways of being a director, and there's different ways of being a filmmaker. And no film is ever made by one person. I get the value of the whole auteur thing, but I really object to the like great man story behind the auteur thing as well. Because the truth is every film is a collaboration.
Yeah.
Um, but this was I mean, it was humbling and beautiful, and also, I mean, really allowed me to develop a wonderful new artistic relationship and friendship with Lily in particular, but also with everybody who is helping me with expertise that I don't have. Malky Goldman, who's also one of our actors who plays Yenta, who's taking care of Gele. She also did our set design, and learning from her and learning about who grew up Hasidic as a Yiddish speaker, getting her guidance on not just pointing to like what looks good or what feels right, but like what has, the right symbolic appropriateness, and working with Lily in a way that's like so profoundly vulnerable to hand your work over to someone and have them transform it such that it is still your work, but it is also theirs. And having, working with actors and trusting them and trusting people to help catch the like little variations in pronunciation that really matter even more than any other film I've ever made. This really felt like a trust fall in a very, very good way that I think ultimately really rewarded me. And it just affirmed for me that is always how I want to make films. I don't want to be a control freak. I want to build relationships with other creative people, with other artists that I trust, and make work that way forever. And probably there's something in there about what I learned about myself as a person too, but I might have to dig into that in therapy next time. Um, and what comes to mind, at least when I think about what I learned about myself as a person, I gained a lot. This was a similarly vulnerable new experience, and I was anxious going into it. Anxious, not about making the decisions, about knowing what I wanted it to look like, but about really confronting my feelings about Yiddish and confronting my feelings about not being able to proactively communicate in Yiddish as well as my actors could. And, taking ownership of what I think of as a very important part of my cultural heritage, and just being really being given the gift of engaging with it while also getting to be very honest with where I'm at, which is that I can understand. I cannot yet communicate in to the degree and the level that my many wonderful collaborators can, but I can understand, and that's something. And in fact, one of my actors is now directly working with me as my Yiddish teacher, so that I can actually learn to have real conversations in Yiddish instead of yes, no, my mother's in the kitchen, etc. And then starting in Yiddish and finishing in English, and all of that. So I think that there's an aspect of Jewish cultural heritage that I maybe would have been afraid to admit felt scary to me
Yeah.
before I did this film.
I love that. I love all of that. Yeah. Yeah. So thank you so much. So, Paige, if you want to just let everybody know, and there will, of course, as usual, be links in the show notes. But if you want to let everybody know where they can find you or where they can follow the film, follow along for updates.
Yes, absolutely. The easiest way to find updates on the short version of STRIYA, on the feature version of STRIYA, on the other feature that I'm in development for right now that I'm very excited about, is just to follow me on Instagram. My Instagram is Paige, like my name, Paige, soup, SOUP, like the liquid food. um, my last name is Campbell. I'm very creative, as you can see. We love a pun on Campbell soup. I know four other Campbells that aren't related to me that are also first name soup. Um, so I really thought that I did something with that one 15 years ago or whenever I joined Instagram. Yeah, so at PAIGESOUP on Instagram, I'm going to post all of my festival screenings. Hopefully we'll have some in New York soon. I feel certain that we'll have some in other places and hopefully other countries. And that'll also be where I, start sharing information about the feature version and the other stuff that I'm working on as well.
Awesome. Well, I can't wait. And I wish you the best of luck. I really did. I really enjoyed this short, and I felt like it's so hard to find anything new when it comes to vampires. And so having something so completely new was really nice too. So
Thank you. Thank you
you're
for
welcome.
saying that. I'm
Of
really, I'm
course.
really glad that you enjoyed it, and thank you for having me on. This has been wonderful.
Of course. Thank you so much.